Hello, good evening. We started Sugya 1.12 last time, but I think we'll start again from the beginning of that. In your formatted Gemara, that's page 10. Inside of a regular Gemara, it is the very bottom of Chav Zayin Amud Aleph, second to last line. Okay, so if you recall, the Gemara was talking about Rebbe Yirmiyah, and that he was davening right behind Rav. Rav did not want to step back because that would interrupt Rebbe Yirmiyah's Shemona Esrei, and we learned from there that you're not allowed to do that. You're not supposed to, you're not supposed to pass in front of someone who's davening. So the Gemara now goes off on a tangent about the propriety of Rebbe Yirmiyah doing that he davens directly in back of his Rebbe. The Rebbe Yirmiyah, and Rebbe Yirmiyah, Heichi Ovid Hachi. Heichi means how. Ovid, did he do? Hachi, this way. Now that's a little confusing. Heichi and Hachi sound pretty similar, but Heichi means how did he do Hachi, this? How did he do that? How did he do this? Meaning, how could he daven behind his Rebbe, or directly behind his Rebbe? V'ha'amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav. But said Rav Yehuda Amar Rav, Rav Yehuda quoted Rav as having said, La'olam, forever, Al Yispal Adam, a person should not daven lo keneged Rabbo, not even with his Rebbe, which means side by side. That's considered to be inappropriate because you're making yourself as if equal to your Rebbe, and you shouldn't do that. But here he says, V'alo achorei Rabbo, and not even behind his Rebbe. Evidently, that even to daven directly behind one's Rebbe is considered to be inappropriate. You should either daven well behind your Rebbe, or you should daven, behind him and off to the side, but not directly behind him.
What does Tosfos say over there? Rashi says, "Keneged Rabbi, Eitzla Rabbi, Umara Ki'ilu Heim Shavim."
Mm-hmm. Right. Mm-hmm.
So when you stand right behind your Rebbe davening, it's Ki'ilu, I'm on the same level. Is that what he's saying?
As apparently that's considered to be inappropriate even there, even though you're behind him. But apparently you're close enough behind him that you don't show that there's a distinction between you and the Rebbe, and that is also inappropriate. So the Gemara's question was, how could Rebbe Yirmiyah have davened in such close proximity to Rav, to the point where he was within 4 amos of him? Obviously, because Rav could not step back. So how could he do that? The halacha is that Rav himself said that a person should not daven behind his Rebbe like that. And the Gemara adds on, Rebbe Eliezer says, Ha-mispal achorei Rabbo. Ha-mispal means the one who davens. So the one who davens, or the davener who is achorei Rabbo, who is behind his Rebbe, which means directly behind his Rebbe, v'hanos in shalom l'Rabbo, or someone who gives shalom to his Rebbe. Now, with that, we're going to see that this is inappropriate. Now, when it means nosin shalom l'Rabbo, that he gives peace to his Rebbe, he says hello to his Rebbe, that does not sound inappropriate. That sounds like it's perfectly legitimate and should be done. But what it means is he gives shalom to his Rebbe as if it was a regular person. He speaks to him in a way like, hey, how you doing, buddy? Right? Things like that. You speak to him even if you are being congenial and friendly, but you can't do that to your Rebbe. You can't speak like that to your Rebbe. You have to show your Rebbe is on a higher pedestal. And therefore, when you are nosin shalom l'rabbo in a casual way, that's inappropriate. The same thing is the next thing, ha'machzor shalom l'rabbo. If a person responds shalom to the Rebbe, also, what that means is you respond, your Rebbe speaks to you and asks you, how are you doing? And you respond in a casual manner as if you would be speaking to your buddy. That's also inappropriate. You have to put your Rebbe on a higher pedestal. You can't speak to him like he's your friend. You have to speak to him, he's your Rebbe. And because he's your Rebbe, you have to speak to him with due awe and respect. Furthermore, v'acholek al yeshivaso shel Rabbo. A person who disagrees with yeshivaso shel Rabbo, the yeshiva of his Rebbe. What that means is the place where he sits. That means his position. You feel that he does not belong in the position that he is. A person learned by a certain Rebbe, and then you say, he doesn't deserve to be, he's not a big enough Talmid Chacham to be the Rosh Hashiva. He's not a big enough Talmid Chacham to be the Maggid Shir of that shir. Or something like that. You feel that he is inappropriate. Or that you feel that his actions are such that he is inappropriate to take that position as the Rav or something like that, right? Anything like that, that's also obviously disparaging the Rebbe, and therefore you cannot do that. The Omer Davar Shelo Shama Mipi Rabbo. Or one who says something that he did not hear from his Rebbe. Now I'll discuss that in a minute. Sounds like you're not allowed to say anything unless you heard it from your Rebbe. Any of those, if you daven behind your Rebbe, immediately behind your Rebbe, person who speaks casually to his Rebbe, even if friendly, responds casually to the Rebbe, argues over his position, or he says something over that he did not hear from his Rebbe. Gorem lishchina. He causes the Shechina, the divine presence, shetistalik miYisrael, that should remove itself from Klal Yisrael. Wow. A person who does any of those things causes the Shechina to leave Klal Yisrael. Basically stated, that means that Rebbe Eliezer is telling you that any time that a person acts even inappropriately, but even casually, in other words, doesn't think that this is so inappropriate, but acts in an inappropriate way, does not give his Rebbe the proper due awe and respect, it causes the Shechina to leave Klal Yisrael. And that's because that our entire Torah Shabbal Peh is based on Mesorah. It's based on the tradition that we get from our Rebbeim. And even though that nowadays we have written, everything is written, even the Torah Shabbal Peh is all written down, but still, you learned from your Rebbe how to analyze it, how to learn it, how to get it. And therefore, if you do not hold your Rebbe in proper esteem, that will make it that the Torah will not stay in Klal Yisrael, and hence the Shechina leaves. So I just want to pick up one or 2 points. That which it says, Ha'omer Davar Shelo Shama Mipi Rabbo, one who says something over that he did not hear from his Rebbe. Now, at first glance, that sounds kind of bizarre. What do you mean? I'm not allowed to say anything that I didn't hear from my Rebbe? I'm only allowed to quote my Rebbe. I'm not allowed to say anything on my own. I'm not allowed to say anything that I didn't hear from him. I'm not allowed to use my own mind. That doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Like, is that really what it means? So I saw in the Marsha is, for all those who are interested, is Reb Shmuel Edel's. He was considered the greatest commentary of Gemara, Rashi, and Tosas that ever was. He lived in the early 1600s. He was the chief rabbi of Austria. But as great a person as Rabbi Akiva Eiger has said, that he reached his understanding of Torah because he studied the Maharsha. Just give you an idea of who was the Maharsha. So the Maharsha wrote an amazing commentary on, it's printed in the back of most Gemaras, and in it he splits it into two parts. He splits it that he wrote a commentary on the halachic parts of the Gemara, and he wrote a commentary called the Chidushi Agadas, on the Agadatic part of the Gemara. And he was equally famed for both. So here he is discussing the Agada part, and he talks about this, and he says, it is illogical to assume that it means you can never say anything with that your Rebbe, you didn't hear from your Rebbe. The Gemara is full of people who say things out of logic, and they think through, and they come to their own logical conclusions. It is impossible that that's what the Gemara means. So the Maharsha suggests that what it means is that if you're saying something over that requires a drasha, in other words, you're expounding a pasuk. You're not saying something from logic. You're expounding a pasuk. That you should not say unless you heard it from your Rebbe, because there already requires a special Masorah of how to darshan the pasuk, how to derive something from a pasuk. That requires your Rebbe, and therefore you should never say some sort of drasha unless you heard it from your Rebbe. If you didn't hear from your Rebbe, even though that you might say, well, my Rebbe darshan something like this in some other place, this sounds like it's pretty similar, I should be able to darshan it. No. Don't darshan a pasuk unless you heard it directly from your Rebbe. But if you're talking about something of logic, something where you just think through and you logic can conclude that I feel that this is the logical conclusion, this should be the logical halacha, or the logical approach to this matter, so then, yes, the Maharsha says there's nothing wrong with saying something over that you didn't hear from your Rebbe. Everybody should do that. I mean, that's we actually extol Chidushei Torah. We like that. We everybody has their own portion in Torah, and they see things the way they see it, and they're supposed to use their own mind. And quite the contrary, that's what you should be doing. So that's regarding that point about saying something which you did not hear from your Rebbe. Based on that Maharsha, it's very limited in its application. But getting back to the main point of our Gemara, what the Gemara is now saying is that this Rebbe Eliezer's statement is basically just adding fuel to the fire to the original question. The question was, why did Rabbi Yirmiyah daven right behind Rav? We know that Rav himself was quoted as having said that a person is not supposed to daven equal, side by side to his Rebbe, or even behind him. And then we add on to that, and we say, Rebbe Eliezer even goes as far as to say that if a person who does any of those things, and one of them is, and as a matter of fact, the very first one is davening directly in back of his Rebbe, or acting casually to your Rebbe, disagreeing with your Rebbe, or saying something of a drasha, which you didn't hear from your Rebbe, it causes the Shekhinah to leave Klal Yisrael. It causes the divine presence to leave. So clearly, Rabbi Yirmiyah had no business davening right behind his Rebbe. So what on earth was he doing? Why was he doing that? Did Rabbi Yirmiyah not know that there's halacha? His own Rebbe had said it. It's logical that Rabbi Yirmiyah was aware of it. So what's he doing right behind his Rebbe? You're not supposed to daven there. That's the Gemara's question. So it's a question on Rabbi Yirmiyah. Rabbi Yirmiyah was a great Talmid Chacham. He probably knew what he was doing. So how come that he was davening in a place where clearly that's inappropriate? So the Gemara says, Shani Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba. Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba is Shani, is different. Why is he different? the Talmid Chaver Hava. That he was a Talmid Chaver. What is a Talmid Chaver? A Talmid who was a contemporary. Now let me explain that for a minute. A Talmid Chaver means as follows. Usually the Rebbe is, older, and he has Talmidim because he has great erudition in Torah, and he gets students, and people come to listen to his Torah. Okay. That's generally the way it is. There are some exceptions. There were people who were so great in Torah that even their contemporaries, or for that matter, even people who were older than they, came to listen to their Torah. It is said, for example, that the Arizal, when he started expounding, there were people who were twice his age who came and wanted to listen to the Arizal because they recognized his amazing superiority in Torah, and they were ready and willing to subjugate themselves, so to speak, to the Arizal, recognizing how great he was, and that even though that they were much older than him, nevertheless, they recognized that. So sometimes you can have a relationship of a Talmid Chaver, a Talmid who is a contemporary. So you're somewhere hovering in between the Talmid position, that you are a student, and a student would have to put his Rebbe on a higher pedestal, have to speak to him with awe and respect. On the other hand, he's a contemporary. That means that you're friends. You've been friends for many years. And even though that you may recognize his superiority in learning and in Torah, and you want to listen to his Torah despite the fact that he is your age, or your contemporaries, but you don't have the same relationship. It's not like a Talmud, a pure Talmud to a Rebbe. So Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba, the Gemara says, is a Talmud Chaver, which probably means, although the Gemara doesn't explain it very clearly, but my guess is that probably means that Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba and Rav were of similar age. And they probably knew each other since childhood. But Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba, as the two grew older, recognized Rav's superiority, recognized Rav's greatness. And despite the fact that Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba was, I'm sure, a great Talmid Chacham in his own right, he recognized Rav's superiority over him and accepted him as sort of his Rebbe, despite the fact that they were probably poyed friends. So Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba had this somewhat unusual, somewhat unique relationship with Rav. Rav, to the rest of the world, to almost everybody, was the Gadol Hador. He was Rav. That wasn't even his actual name. He was known as Rav. His actual name was Abba, by the way. But everybody knew him as Rav because he was such a great person. Everybody just called him Rav. But Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba, apparently, because he knew him for so long, and because of the fact that he was somewhat of his same age, so he had a relationship which was known as a Talmid Chaver. So he was at the same time a Talmid, but at the same time as a contemporary. And that's why he could daven behind Rav. He was probably one of the only, if maybe the only one who could do that. Everybody else had to daven much farther back. Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba, he could daven right there because he had a personal relationship with Rav, which goes back for a long time, and he was a contemporary of his as well. And the Gemara even cites a little story here to explain this, or to illustrate this. V'hainu, and that is the Ka'amar le Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba l'Rav. This is that which Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba said to Rav. And we'll see in Rashi what this is referring to, that Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba asked Rav. If you remember, Rashi is going to tell you this, that in the earlier Gemara, the Gemara had said that Rav went to Geniva's house and accepted Shabbos early, right? He davened an early Shabbos. He davened of Shabbos be'erev Shabbos, which means that he davened early, right? As we had mentioned earlier in the previous sugya. Okay, so the Gemara brings that Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba says, Mi badalta? Did you separate? Now what that means, as we're going to see in Rashi, it means, did you separate from work? You davened early, so it's Friday afternoon. It's late Friday afternoon, but it's still before sundown. So Rav already davened early. So Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba asked him, did you separate from work? Did you accept Shabbos in the full sense of the word, that now you're not going to do any more work? Maybe you're just davening early, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you've accepted Shabbos in the work sense. That, oh, okay, now it's Shabbos. I'm not going to do any more work until after Shabbos is over.
So badalta is hevdel.
Right.
Badalta means you made a hevdel.
Right. Did you make did you separate from work? Right, as from the term of havdalah, correct? And Amarle, so he told him, meaning Rav responded to Rav Yirmiyah bar Abba's question. He says, yes, badilna. Yes, I separated. Meaning, yes, I've accepted Shabbos. Yes, I davened early, and yes, I'm accepting Shabbos, and no, I'm not going to do any more work until Saturday night. So, which means that Rav, yes, is accepting Shabbos early in the full sense of the word. Not only is he davening early, but he's actually accepting Shabbos early. And it's just like we do, that when we daven early, we accept Shabbos, and it's a full-blown Shabbos, even though that when we walk out of shul on these early Friday night minyanim, right, it's still sunny outside, it still might have another half an hour until Shkia. Maybe even more, but it doesn't matter. You accepted Shabbos. And this you see that from this Gemara, that Rav did that.
How does one actually in Tachlis accept Shabbos? When you just say it? Or when you say, it's a shiloh in the poskim exactly when. Some say that when you say Boikala, some say when you say Mizmor Shel Yom HaShabbos, others when you say Baruch Hu, but somewhere along the line, when you say either one of those things, you have accepted Shabbos. That means you are ushering the Shabbos in for you personally. Women generally do it when they light candles, but not necessarily but generally speaking, we assume that that's true. And the men do it when they say that whatever part of the davening. So should a woman, when she lights candles, have a negative kavanah not to take it Shabbos for their?
If she, the assumption is that a woman is accepting Shabbos when she lights candles, unless she specifically states otherwise.
But for herself.
For herself, yes, correct.
Can she have in mind to take on Shabbos for her family?
That's a question. Simply understood that no, her husband does not follow her. It could be the opposite. It could be that she may follow her husband. And therefore, many poskim, this is a shaila in the poskim, Rav Moshe Feinstein was asked about this. If the husband davens early, does that force the wife to daven, to accept Shabbos when the husband does? Okay, this is a shaila in the poskim. Not everybody, Rebbe Moshe Feinstein held that she does not have to follow her husband in that case. But just for the record, in case you ever saw it, the Aguda, when they put out their schedule over the summer, it says early mincha is such and such, which revolves around plaga mincha, because they don't want to do a tarta desasri, so they do it like Rabbi Yehuda style, right? They do it around plaga mincha. That's a whole different discussion. Okay, we're not going to get into that. And then it says, candle lighting is from such and such time to such and such time. What's that all about? Because you can't light before plaga mincha. Lighting before plaga mincha, accepting Shabbos before plaga mincha doesn't work. So they'll tell you, don't light before plaga mincha, and here's the earliest zman for plaga mincha. But I don't want you to light past this time. And that's because that there's an estimation going on that by the second, you have 2 times, right? From here to here. The first time is plaga mincha, the earliest plaga mincha, so don't light before that. The second time is the estimated time when your husband will have accepted Shabbos in prayer. And Rabbi Heinemann says, Lechatchila, you should not light candles. A woman should not light candles after her husband has been Mekabel Shabbos. Therefore, he writes in the chart, in his time chart, right, in the Zmanei Tefillah chart, they'll say the early candle lighting is from this point till this point. That's the reason. Now you know the reason for that. Okay. So meanwhile, what does all this have to do with anything? We were trying to prove that Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba was some sort of Talmud Chaver, a Talmud who was a contemporary. How does that prove it? So the Gemara says, we just had this, discussion. Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba asked Rav, did you separate from work? And he said, yes, I did separate from work, right? That's what we just discussed. Now the Gemara makes an interesting deduction. The Gemara says, V'lo Amar, and he did not say, Mi bodil mar, did the master separate from work? Meaning, every normal Talmud would of course speak to Rav in reverence and speak to him in third person. Would speak to him and say, did the master separate? No one would have the audacity to speak to Rav, the Gadol Hador, and just call him you. No one would speak like that, right? You didn't speak to you don't even speak to your Rebbe like that. You certainly wouldn't speak to the Gadol Hador like that, right? But Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba said, did you separate? Mi badalta, did you separate? It didn't say, did the master separate? Oh, you see that? Says the Gemara, you see the Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba did not feel compelled to speak to Rav in third person. Did not feel compelled to speak to Rav on that level where he would speak to him in third person. Apparently he felt close enough on a personal basis that he was a Talmud Chaver, and therefore even though he recognized Rav's superiority, but listen, it's hard to speak in third person for a guy who played marbles with when you were 5 years old, and it's hard to do that. And therefore he did not feel, apparently Rav wasn't makbid on him either, right? And even though Rav became the Gadol Hador, still, we're an old friend, you're an old friend, So it was perfectly okay for Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba to speak to him in second person and say, did you separate from work? Here we're going to start with Rashi's. This is where Sugya 1.12 is where I start bringing in the Rashi's. So we're going to start doing Rashi's at first. If you look on your formatted Gemara, you'll see that I have the Rashi's in block print, but just the headers I have it in Rashi print. But we'll eventually move into all the Rashis and in Rashi print. But I wanted to just break in. So we'll do the Rashi. And that is what he said. Meaning, so Rashi explains what I told you. Oso hayom, there's Rashi in the box there. Oso hayom, that day, shehispalel Rav, that Rav davened shal Shabbos be'erev Shabbos. That he davened of Shabbos on erev Shabbos. That was the day that he went to Ganiva's house, and as we said in the previous Gemara, that he davened the Friday night davening early. So that was what the Gemara referred to as he davened Shal Shabbos Be'erev Shabbos. He davened the Friday night, the Shabbos, Shemona Esrei, on Erev Shabbos, he davened early. He basically davened it like an early minyan. So on that day where Rav did that, Amar le Rebbe Yirmiyah told him, or asked him, Mi badalta, did you separate? Now, again, Rashi, in his inimitable style, fills in the blanks without you really realizing that he's filling in the blanks. But Rashi knew that without his running commentary, it would be hard to understand the Gemara, which is completely true because I would have had no idea what he was talking about if Rashi didn't tell me. So he says, that's what Rebbe Yirmiyah told him, Mi badalta, did you separate min ha-milacha, from work, from doing any of the forbidden work on Shabbos? Hoil, since the kibalta alecha Shabbos, since you accepted upon yourself Shabbos, bitfilasecha, in your prayer. You davened of Shabbos. Does that mean that you have accepted Shabbos in the full sense of the word, and therefore you are no longer going to do any malacha?
How could it be otherwise?
It is possible that you davened early just out the derabbanons of prayer. But that doesn't necessarily mean that
Kavanah to take Shabbos.
to take kavanah to take Shabbos in as far as the malachas of Shabbos.
Right.
Because just because that prayer does not necessarily mean that all the other things come along with it. But he said no. That I did, right? Rav answered it, yes, in Badilna, yes, I did separate, which means that he felt that his prayer of Shabbos was accepting Shabbos in the full sense of the word. Now here Rashi just adds on that last line, V'lo Omar, and he did not say, Mi Badil Mar, did the master separate? He didn't say that line, did the master separate? He asked him in the second person, Mi badalta, did you separate? Shema mina. So here Rashi fills in the missing line, or just to make it clarify. Shema mina, we hear from this, Talmud Chaver Havilei. He was considered a student, but a contemporary. At the same time he was a student, and at the same time he was a contemporary. So that gave license to Rav Yirmiyah bar Abba to do two things. Number one, daven right behind him, which would have been inappropriate for a full-blown Talmud. And number two, to speak to Rav apparently in the second person, rather than speak to him in the traditional third person, which I'm sure that 99.9% of the people spoke to Rav as the Gadol Hador and spoke to him in third person, right? When you speaking to a Rosh Hashiva, you never, you get used to speaking like this. I know it's a little awkward for people who are unfamiliar and unused to this, but you would never speak to the Rosh Hashiva as talking to you, right? You say, how is the Rosh Hashiva this morning? You speak, is the Rosh Hashiva doing this? Is the Rosh Hashiva doing that? Right? You address him in the third person, because that's appropriate for his position and his the honor of his greatness in Torah. So I'm sure everyone else, in fact, spoke to Rav in such manner, but Rebbe Yirmiyah bar Abba evidently felt close enough that he didn't have to, and that was okay, and that was a proof that he was a Talmud Chaver, that he was a contemporary at the same time. Okay. I do not have my watch on. What time is it?
20.
Okay, I didn't see that. Okay. Okay, so then we can go on. Okay. In the next few minutes, we can start Sugya 1.13. Okay, so the Gemara now continues discussing this issue that was just brought up. And the Gemara says, Umi badil. And did he in fact separate from work? Oh, is that true? Really? So the Gemara wants to say that, just a second, is that necessarily that it follows that just because that you accepted that Shabbos early in terms of your davening, does that automatically mean that you've accepted Shabbos for work? The Gemara says, Umi badal, did he separate? Which means we're not asking, did Rav do it? Meaning, we're asking, is that really necessary? The Gemara is presuming that Rav meant, yeah, when you daven early, that means you're accepting Shabbos for the Malacha part as well. So the Gemara is questioning that. And the Gemara says, is that so? V'hama Rebbe Abin, but Rebbe Abin said the following: Pam achas, one time, he spalal Rebbe shal Shabbos be'erev Shabbos. Rebbe davened of Shabbos erev Shabbos. Now Rebbe, in all of Shas, whenever you see Rebbe, it's referring to Rabbi Yehuda Nasi. Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, the author of the Mishnah, who was, by the way, Rav's Rebbe. Rav was the first generation Amoraim, and Rav studied in his younger years, when Rebbe was already in his older years. He studied under Rebbe for a little while. Then he studied under others, but Rebbe was the Gadol Hador, of course, in the previous generation before Rav.
He was the last Tana? Or?
It was it wasn't necessarily the last Tana, but he was the greatest of his generation beyond, head and shoulders above everyone else, right? It was Rebbe. He was the one who created the Mishnah. He was the Gadol Hador. He was the Nasi of Klal Yisrael, and he was the Gadol Hador, and he was created the Mishnah.
And right after him, the Amoraim began.
Right, correct. So Rabbi Abin apparently has testimony to the following story. One time, Pamachas, he spalal Rebbe daven shal Shabbos be'erev Shabbos. He davened of Shabbos and erev Shabbos, which means, like we've said in the past, which means he davened the Friday night Shemona Esrei early. In other words, he davened in an early minyan, basically, and he davened when it was still daytime.
After Plaga Mincha. Right,
after Plaga Mincha, he davened like Rabbi Yehuda, that you're allowed to daven Maariv after Plaga Mincha. But right, yeah, he said a regular Shabbos. Friday night, Shabbos, Friday night, Shemona Esrei. But then after he did that, v'nichnas lamerchatz, he then entered the bathhouse. Of course, we know that there's a Isser D'Rabbanon, there's a rabbinic prohibition of entering a bathhouse, taking a bath, especially a hot bath, on Shabbos. The reason for that is discussed in the Gemara in Masech Shabbos. Basically, the reason is because the Rabbanan felt that it was a gezerah because they made a decree, a rabbinic decree, because if a person would bathe on Shabbos, he was afraid that either he would come to pour in hot water because the water was cold and uncomfortable, or that a goy would do it for him, and as a result, he would end up being over the issur of asking a goy to do malacha for him.
Or he would heat up hot water?
Heat up hot water in order to make the bath more comfortable.
Or he himself would heat up hot water?
he himself, he would forget himself because he wanted to bathe and it was uncomfortable in the cold water, or he would ask a goy who would do it, and whatever. So as a result of that, they forbade bathing in hot water. But Rebbe davened early, the nichnas la merchatz. Then he entered into the bathhouse and obviously bathed. You don't enter in the bathhouse, just to, schmooze. You go in to bathe, obviously. Then v'yatza, then he came out, the shana lon pirkin, and he taught us our perek, which basically means that he then sat down to teach us, right? Apparently it was Friday afternoon to teach us the next perek in Mishnayos, whatever, work through the next pieces of Mishnah or the perek or whatever. V'adayin lo chashcha. And all of this happened, and it still had not gotten dark. It still wasn't shkia yet. So he davened early enough that he had enough time to bathe. He came out, and he still had enough time to say a shir. And all of this happened before it got dark. So, according to Rabbi Abin's own testimony, it becomes pretty clear that Rebbe did not accept Shabbos. Because after he had davened the early Shabbos, he went into a bathhouse. And, hey, isn't that forbidden? You're not allowed to do that. Now here, as Rashi adds in, here's the box right there, if you're following. Sal kadatach. We are assuming, Rashi says, he went into the bathhouse. Remember, those were public bathhouses, by the way. Now, sal kadaitach. Sal kadaitach means it entered the mind, which means we are presuming. The presumption in the question is as follows. La'achar shagozru, after that they decreed, after the rabbis decreed, al hazeya, on the steaming, the shvitz as they call it, right? On steaming, v'ala rechitza, and on bathing b'Shabbos. The assumption was that this happened after that the rabbis decreed against steaming oneself, in other words, going into what's commonly known as the schwitz, the sauna, and v'ala rechitza, and on bathing, to go in actually not only into the sauna, but actually into the water and actually bathing. And the assumption is that this was after that decree. Rebbe was living at a time after that decree had already been enacted. Kiri Amrina, and like we say, b'Masechah Shabbos, in Tractate Shabbos, Perek Kira Shetzikua, in that Perek Kira Shetzikua, that's the name of the Perek. It happens to be the third chapter in Shabbos. On Daf Mem Amar Aleph. Okay, Alma, we see, Afal Gav Ditzali, even though Afal Gav means even though Ditzali that he davened, Lo Badil, he did not separate Me'Yisurei Shabbos. He did not separate from prohibitions of Shabbos. You see, the Rebbe did not accept Shabbos. Because presuming that Rebbe lived after those enactments were enacted, he would be forbidden on Shabbos to go into a bathhouse. But he did it. So that leads you to, the conclusion that evidently just because you davened early does not mean that you've accepted all of the prohibitions of work on Shabbos. So Rebbe felt that it was okay, just because I davened early does not prohibit me from going into the bathhouse. So the Gemara is questioning what happened. I don't understand. Rav, when he was asked by Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba, did you separate from work? And he said, yes. The Gemara seems to be assuming, that means Rav must hold that if you accept Shabbos early in prayer, that's accepting Shabbos totally. And yes, if you accept Shabbos in prayer, that means it's Shabbos. You can't do any of the malachos. You can't do any of the work that you were prohibited to do on Shabbos. You've already accepted Shabbos, and that's it. That means you've accepted Shabbos early. Then, well, so be it. Now it's Shabbos for you. But evidently, that's not true. Here you have Rebbe, that according to Rebbe Abin's own testimony, I can personally attest to the idea, Rebbe davened early, and yet he walked into a bathhouse after that. And assuming that Rebbe lived after the time that Gzeru was enacted, it should have been forbidden, at least rabbinically. So what's he doing? That seems to, something's got to give. That seems to imply that Rebbe felt that just because you daven does not necessarily mean that you automatically accept upon yourself all the stringencies of Shabbos. So the Gemara says, Amar Rava, Rava gives an answer, says, Hahu, that one, meaning Rebbe, when he walked into the bathhouse, the nichnas lahazia. He went in for the steam, sauna. The kodem gzeira hava, and it was before the decree. Meaning, as we'll see in Rashi in a minute, the decree on sauna came after the decree of bathing. In order that the way it worked was that first they decreed against bathing, and then the Gemara in Shabbos over there says that people would go in for the sauna, and they say, okay, well, I'm not bathing. But once they were in there, it was hard to avoid, I'll just bathe a little bit, or whatever it is. And the Rabbanan saw that if they're already inside the door, then it's not going to work. So there were then, after they made the first gzeira of not bathing, lest that they come to heat up the water, they had to add on afterwards a second gzeira not to go in even for the sauna.
Is that a gzeira?
It's like a gzeira to keep the original gzeira, right? Sometimes the Rabbanan had to make a second gzeira to keep the original one, even though that generally we don't do that. But if they felt that it was necessary in order to keep the first one, because otherwise the first one would fall apart, so then that was okay.
It's not a gzeira on a gzeira, it's a gzeira to protect the first gzeira.
Right, that's right. So therefore, that's the Gemara says in Shabbos. So Rava says that when Rebbe walked in, he lived after the first gzeira, but it was before the second gzeira. He lived in that in-between time after they had decreed not to take a bath, but before that they had that subsequent gzeira of forbidding the sauna. So Rebbe walked in and he schwitzed, in other words, he just took in some of the steam of the bathhouse without entering the water, as Rashi says, Amar Rava Lazia. Rava says that's referring to just to steam, to schwitz. Nichnas, he entered lahazia, to schwitz, to sweat, machmas chom beis hamerachatz, due to the heat of the bathhouse. V'lo nosan alav mayim, but he did not put on him water. In other words, he didn't bathe. It was purely external, outside of the water. So he was not bathing, he was steaming, sauna. But then the next Rashi says the Kodem Gzeira was before the decree Ad Shelo Gazru Al Hazeya. It was prior to that they had not yet decreed on steaming. So Rebbe says Rava, the answer is like this. When Rebbe Abin said that, I personally can attest to the fact that Rebbe davened early and then he went into the bathhouse, that does not mean he did not accept on himself Shabbos. He did. He accepted upon himself Shabbos. However, it happened to be that in those days, at the particular time when Rebbe lived, it was permitted to walk in. The rabbis had not yet decreed on the steaming part, and therefore it was permitted for him to walk in to get a steam, to get a schwitz, as long as he didn't bathe in the water, and that was fine. So therefore, the Gemara Rav is saying like this. Really, the halacha is that once you've accepted Shabbos in your prayer, you've accepted Shabbos for all things. That which Rebbe did over there, and he walked into the merchatz, you're right. In our day and age, he could not have done that. But when he was living, it was still mutter, because they had not yet come decree, that second gzeira, that second decree of you're not supposed to even enter the bathhouse for a steam. But he lived before that, so it comes out that yes, he was forbidden to do all the malachas. It was forbidden for him to even bathe, but he didn't go to bathe. He only went to the steam. And at that point in time, the rabbis had not yet decreed on that, and therefore it was permitted yet. So really, Rebbe also accepted Shabbos in his prayer, and it was Shabbos for him. It happened to be that he was allowed to go into the merchatz, because in his particular situation, entering the merchatz for the purpose of a steam was okay. But you're right, nowadays, where we are, of course, after the subsequent gzera, we would not have been able to walk into the bathhouse at all.
But today, when we take on Shabbos early, after Plag HaMincha at Kidashta, we can't have negative kavanah to do malach afterwards.
Correct.
Because we are...
You accepting Shabbos.
It's Shabbos.
That's what the Gemara is now saying. That is correct. Now the Gemara isn't through yet. Next piece of the Gemara is still going to try to question that. We'll see. The Gemara is still going to try to question whether that's accurate or not. But that's the Gemara's conclusion is going to be, as we'll see eventually, that that is correct. That once you've accepted Shabbos in your prayer early, that's Shabbos, and you've accepted Shabbos, and now you have to separate from all forbidden work.
There's no t'nai. You cannot make a t'nai. A woman can make a t'nai when she lights candles, saying, "I'm lighting candles now, but I'm not taking Shabbos." Normally she does, but she can make a t'nai.
Right.
But a man cannot.
Apparently not. Right. Correct.
When he's davening.
Right. That's
correct. He can make it tonight when he's not lighting candles. A husband.
Yeah.
He can do that, but not when he's making davening. Davening is already.
That's already right. That's right.
Can you repeat that just for the?
Davening is accepting Shabbos, and yes, if you daven early, if you go to an early minyan during the summer months, which is very common, yes, you've accepted Shabbos in the full sense of the word, and of course you're not allowed to do any of the malacha at that time.